Okay, so since I don't have a 3 to do the 3DO, I have 2, I'll do a 2DO. And it'll illustrate everything that we need to about how to do the DO amalgam prep, for example. So again, I'm going to start with the burr in the middle of the contact, facial-lingually, and then right next to the adjacent tooth. I'll drill a hole about the depth of the burr. And then I'm going to find the facial-lingual margins, the way we always do. Again, look so you can see how close you are to the adjacent tooth. Doesn't matter whether it's a first or a second molar. So I know I'm going to get some clearance there, right? Then I'm going to go lingually a little more over here with the burr right next to the adjacent tooth. So that I can be sure I'm going to get some lingual clearance. I'm going to go a little farther. So that's the first part. Now I'm going to, as we've done before, start at that margin and come straight in. At the same pupil level, we're going to cut straight in from that margin. And make sure we adjust the angle until we get a 90-degree angle. Then I'm going to do the same thing on the lingual. Find the margin. And you cut straight in at the same level. And now I have a 90-degree angle over here. I might adjust it just a little bit more. But again, everything's done at the same pupil for level that we established at the beginning when we cut that first hole. Now I'm going to cut from here. I'm going to follow along. There's 2 distal pits. So I want to include this one that's closest to the oblique ridge. But I'm looking along the oblique ridge so I know where I'm going. I know I'm just barely including that other pit. But again, it's the direction that you're looking that makes all the difference here. And then make a smooth connection over here. Get rid of the excess in between. And that's a reasonable occlusal outline for the DO on this tooth. Now I'll switch over and use a 55 burr to go gingival, the same as always. So now I'm going to drill a hole against the facial wall. Same thing on the lingual side. Drill a hole and cut away from that side. So that's steps 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we're going to get rid of the excess. Now, have I gone far enough gingivally yet, do you think? And the answer to that question is, we have no idea. I have no idea if I've gone far enough gingivally. When I clear off the excess gingival, then I'll have a lingual or gingival margin. Then I'll be able to tell if I've gone far enough gingivally. But I can't tell how much clearance I have, so I get rid of all this excess here and flatten the gingival floor. Okay, now it turns out that I have gone far enough gingivally. I have enough gingival clearance to work with. So there's the internal line angle over here, the internal line angle over here. Got a nice flat gingival floor all the way to the margin. So that's all I need to do at this point. Now let's use the hand instruments and finish it. So in the upper right, we'll use the hoe. On the facial and lingual walls. So again, we look down the wall, and so we can see that we're keeping the instrument perpendicular to the surface from the occlusal down to the gingival, and we can sharpen the internal line angle as well. Then down the lingual side, get rid of the hook that's on the facial margin, or lingual margin. Again, you have to use the mirror when you use the hand instrument, so you can see what you're doing. Then we'll use the enamel hatchet, which fits against the axial wall, to do a retentive groove. We talked about the DO is absolutely required that we make retentive grooves for an amalgam restoration. So lean the instrument away from the lingual wall. Use the upper corner of the instrument to cut into the lingual wall all the way down to the gingival floor. Okay, so I can feel it. I can see the retentive grooves. Now let's use the distal GMT. Turn the patient to the right. So we're going to do the axial pulpal bevel. You can use a burr for doing that too if you want. You might ask yourself, what burr would you use and how would you do it? And then angle the gingival floor, just like we've done before, and angle it all the way to the lingual wall and all the way to the buccal wall. Okay, so basically there's the DO. That's a nice, cute little prep, huh? Okay, so let's see if you can do that, but do it on the first molar, and then it's going to be a little bit bigger, and you'll have a little bit more inter-arch space to work and so forth. But this is the basic technique that we're trying to do. All right, so you're trying to go gingivally, but you don't have any facial clearance.
Yeah, I'm still trying.
No, we don't go gingivally until we get our facial lingual margins exactly where they need to be. All right, that's what's getting you in trouble. So you're going to have to go back and redo this whole thing, but you've got to get the margin out facially. So you're afraid to do it without damaging the adjacent tooth, right? So look this way so you know you're not damaging the adjacent tooth. So you know you're going to have some clearance. But that facial is really important to get the margin and the angle and the wall right before you try to go gingivally. It's what guides you when you go gingivally. So find the margin, find the angle, get the length. Then from here, also, you're going to use that to guide you when you cut along the oblique ridge like this. You're going to look this way and follow the oblique ridge like this. So you could have been about here with your margin. Okay, so you're extending up here more than you needed to. But that's mostly because you didn't finish the facial wall before you tried to do the rest of the occlusal outline. Now, how'd you get so much clearance lingually? So you have to replay the videotape in your head and find out why that is. But anyway, yeah, you know you're way too far extended lingually. Now when you go gingivally, you're going to look this way, so you can put the corner of the box maybe right there on the facial side, maybe right here. A little bit closer to that facial wall. But once you find the corners, then you can shape the axial wall. But you see, you ended up way inside here. Yeah. So it's finding the corners. Now the lingual corners, easy to see because it's right in front of you. The facial, you can't see the corner, but you can see where you are axially, and that's all you need to see. And cut away from those walls, get rid of the excess. But you'll never end up being this deep axially as long as you're looking this direction. And just go gingivally a little bit at a time. You can, from now on, ignore this and keep your axial wall right here on the lingual side. But make sure you get rid of all the excess every time you go gingivally. And then you'll know whether you need to go gingivally again. So get rid of all this excess right next to the adjacent tooth. You might be afraid to do it because you're afraid to hit the adjacent tooth, but if you look this way, you know, I know how close I am to the adjacent tooth, and I also know that I have to go farther gingivally, right? It's only when we get rid of all the excess that you can tell if you have any gingival clearance, and then you know whether you're going to have to go gingivally more or not. Okay, so go farther gingivally. Okay, but use those corners, all right? Okay. Say again?
Wide.
Wide. Okay, well that doesn't tell me much.
Wide right now.
Which direction are you talking about wide?
Occlusal.
Which direction are you talking about on the occlusal wide?
Stomach system.
There's no isthmus on these. So, are you saying it's is it overextended toward the oblique ridge?
No, it's just.
Oh, okay, then you're
floor is
good.
wide.
Well, you cut all the way over the oblique ridge, right? So yeah, it's way overextended toward the oblique ridge
So where should I have stopped?
before you got to the top of the oblique ridge. You should have stopped about right here. Okay. So you see the distal pit was about here, and that's where you needed to include that, but you didn't need to go all the way over the oblique ridge. But now, on the other hand, you don't have clearance lingually, you're not going to get clearance facially.
I'm
So,
going down gingival.
no, we don't go gingivaly until you finish the occlusal. So your occlusal is nowhere close to being finished, so let's finish it. We have to get the facial margin, right? So you know we drill a hole in the middle of the contact, then we find the facial margin, then we find the lingual margin, and make sure you do before you move on to the next step. Even farther. So you see, you didn't find the margins. And then your big mistake is, without finding the margins, you went ahead anyway. Okay?
Down, yeah.
Well, whatever, the next step you should not have gone to. The next step was the rest of the occlusal outline. So now we're pretty confident that we have the facial lingual margins where we need them. And once we get the margins, what do we do then? No. You're skipping 6 steps.
Oh.
Once we find the margins, the next thing we do is we cut in from the margin at a 90-degree angle, or whatever angle we want, right? Is this amalgam or composite?
Amalgam.
Okay, then we're going to cut in at a 90-degree angle. Find the margin, cut in at a 90-degree
So
angle.
when I'm cutting like this, mine is becoming round.
It won't be round if you're cutting only in one direction. If you go back and forth, it's always round. If you cut one direction, it's never round.
So when we go inside, we need to lift the bar up and then go back again.
Yeah, absolutely. So start the margin, cut straight in, and adjust the angle until you're happy. Keep changing it. So you find your margin, you keep moving your margin until you're happy. Keep adjusting the angle until you're happy. Get the length. Okay, so now we know the axial is going to go about right here. On the lingual, look how much I've moved your lingual margin.
So I was caught on the lingual.
You're way underextended lingually and buccally. But now, once we get the margin, then we can cut the angle inward. Then we get that's the occlusal part of the box. Okay? Now, once we have this area, we're going to cut from here along, follow the distal lingual groove. Here's the distal lingual groove. See that white shiny thing? So that's where we go from here. You just follow the distal lingual groove right here. Then come back. And then come along the groove. It's cutting a nice, long, straight wall, right? So we have to be looking in the right direction so we know we're cutting straight and following the oblique ridge. That's how we get the outline form the way that we want. So this is where your margin should have been. So you see how much farther you went? Now, once you get the occlusal outline done a little more completely, then you're ready to go gingivally. Okay?
For the clearance.
To get gingival clearance, yeah. And then, so we find the corner about right here. We cut down each of these walls and cut away from those walls. That's the shape of the axial. Now get rid of the excess and see if you have enough gingival clearance. If you don't, repeat the process. 7 steps. So you can't do any of that until you finish the occlusal outline to the point where I got the occlusal outline beautiful, then you can go gingival. Don't skip ahead. Okay? All right. Okay. All right. So what do you think so far?
Lingual clearance is not good. Yeah, I need to cut more.
Well, the clearance doesn't look too bad. Now, if your wall were a little more vertical, it would probably work out better. Now, if your burr were a little more vertical,
And I also messed up the next one.
so you end up leaning lingually. Look how much you were leaning lingually. Instead of keeping it vertical, you leaned it lingually. So everybody tends to lean the burr away from their eyes. Just check to make sure you're not doing that. Look this way to make sure it's vertical. Then look this way. And once you find the margin, then you cut straight in. Find the margin, find the angle, but only cut straight in. Only cut from the margin in. Never cut outward at all. Never go back and forth or you get a rounded shape. Yeah, and you definitely have the burr leaning like this. So that's when you gave in to temptation and decided to try to look down the axis. It'll bite you every time, okay? Then you can get the corners. But when you work in the box, just look this way all the time. Make sure it's vertical, but then look this way. So you see how close you are to the adjacent tooth. You can see how deep you are axially. All that stuff you need to see. But now we can go gingivally a couple more times until you get the gingival clearance. And once you find this area here, once you find the margin and the angle and the length, then cut straight following the oblique ridge. Okay, go right into that distal lingual groove, right along there. Then make this smooth connection here. But you see, this is where your outline form should have been. So you actually cut a little bit over the top of the oblique ridge. And you want to stay a third of the distance between the pit and the top of the oblique ridge. Okay, so see if you can refine the internal line angles a little bit. So use those corners when you go gingival. And just cut away from this wall and away from that wall, and you'll get the shape that you need while you're getting the gingival clearance. Okay? All right. Oops, sorry. Okay, still having a little trouble with vertical angle, but you're having a big problem with the oblique ridge. There's something about the oblique ridge that you don't like, right? So most people like the oblique ridge, but see the way you cut right through it? You cut all the way over here, almost to the central pit. Okay, so what we do is we find the margins facial lingually, and we cut in straight at a 90-degree angle, only cutting one direction to make sure the burr is vertical. Keep the burr vertical, find the margin, cut straight in from the margin, always from the margin inward, never cut outward, never go back and forth. And once you have straight walls that are vertical and they're long enough, then you can start thinking about the next step. Now the next step from the facial side is to cut along the oblique ridge like this. So remember the diagram that we had on the board? So start here and follow the oblique ridge into that distal lingual groove right there. There's the distal lingual groove. You want to extend a little bit into that, then come back this way. You're looking parallel to the oblique ridge and removing the burr parallel to the oblique ridge. So this is where your outline form would have been, right here. This is what makes sense. So cutting way over here, there's no reason for doing that, right? Okay, now when you're going gingival, the good news is that you're keeping the burr a little more vertical, but we do need to make sure we finish the 7 steps every time. So we'll review that a little bit. So the 55 burr. So I'll put the burr against the lingual wall. Now that I've got the occlusal part of the wall where I want it, other than that damaged area there, put the burr against that wall and find the corner at the bottom of that wall right there with the burr vertical. Then we can get rid of the excess along that wall to match the gingival part to the occlusal part. And now the wall's flat all the way down to where you have the gingival floor. Now on the facial side, this area on the occlusal is not too bad, but you have all this excess here. See how you made the corner here, but you left all this excess. So we're going to make sure that every time you come down the corner and then cut away from that wall, that you're going to come back, and step 5 is to get rid of the excess along that wall, right to the margin and down to the gingival floor. And then we get rid of the excess on the gingival. Again, always checking to make sure the burr is vertical and looking this way to make sure you're not hitting the adjacent tooth. That's the critical part of it. Okay, so now it's looking pretty good. So you could smooth that facial wall a little bit more, but and then the corner should have been about right here. You went a little bit too deep axially. But the biggest problem by far was what you did on the occlusal outline. Okay, you're not thinking about where the decay is. So again, it's a thought process. We visualize the decay, visualize what we need to do to fix the tooth, then keep it refined or confined to just what we need to do. But your gingival clearance is nice. You didn't go too deep gingivally. So as long as you don't go any farther, we're good. All right. Much better.